You're listening to the one news show that keeps you informed on the world around you. This is 41.1 The Info Loop.
How's it going, guys? This is Mikkel Nelson, and you're listening to 41.1 The Info Loop. I got an interesting story from the Canadian press to share with you, so let's get started. A wooden box containing Fidel Castro's ashes was placed by his brother and successor on Sunday into the side of a granite boulder that has become Cuba's only official monument to the charismatic bearded rebel who seized control of a U.S. allied Caribbean island and transformed it into a Western outpost of Soviet-style communism that he ruled with absolute power for nearly half a century. According to the Canadian press, the private early morning ceremony was attended by members of Fidel Castro's family, the ruling Politburo of the single-party system he founded, and Latin American leaders who installed closely allied leftist governments in Venezuela, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and Brazil. After 9 days of fervent national mourning and wall-to-wall homages to Castro on state-run media, the government barred independent coverage of the funeral, releasing a handful of photos and brief descriptions of the ceremony later in the day. The ceremony began at 6:39 a.m. when the military caravan bearing Castro's remains in a flag-draped cedar coffin left the Plaza of the Revolution in the eastern city of Santiago. Thousands of people lined the 2-mile route to Santa Ifigenia Cemetery, waving Cuban flags and shouting, "Long live Fidel." The ashes were delivered to Castro's younger brother and successor, President Raul Castro, who wore his olive general's uniform as he placed the remains into a niche in the enormous gray boulder that will serve as his tomb. The niche was sealed with a green marble plaque emblazoned with the name Fidel in gold letters. The tomb stands to the side of a memorial to the rebel soldiers killed in an attack that Castro led on Santiago's Moncada barracks on July 26, 1953, and in front of the mausoleum of Cuban national hero Jose Marti. As the funeral ended, martial music could be heard outside the cemetery, where Inés de la Rosa was among the mourners gathered. The decision to keep the final farewell private came the morning after Raul Castro announced that Cuba would profit the naming of the streets and monuments after his brother, and bar the construction of statues of the former leader and revolutionary icon, in keeping with his desire to avoid a cult of personality. Fidel Castro, who stepped down in 2006 after falling ill, kept his name off public sites during his near half-century in power because he said he wanted to avoid the development of a personality cult. In contrast, the images of his fellow revolutionary fighters, Camilo Cienfuegos and Che Guevara, became common across Cuba. In the decades since their deaths, mourning for Castro has been fervent and intense across the country since his death, particularly in rural eastern Cuba, where huge crowds have been shouting Castro's name and lining the roads to salute the funeral procession carrying his ashes. Castro's reign over the island nation, 90 miles, 145 kilometers from Florida, was marked by U.S. Back Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 and the Cuban Missile Crisis a year later that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Castro, who outlasted a crippling U.S. trade embargo as well as dozens, possibly hundreds of assassination plots, died 10 years after a life-threatening illness led to him to turn over power to his brother. Castro overcame imprisonment at the hands of dictator Fulgencio Batista, exile in Mexico, and a disastrous start to his rebellion before triumphantly riding into Havana in January 1959 to become, at age 32, the youngest leader in Latin America. For decades, his defiance of the U.S. and dedication to social equality, free healthcare, and universal education was a sort of inspiration and support to revolutionaries from Latin America to Africa, even as Cubans who fled to exile loathed him with equal measure. Not much to say on this really, but the thing I find very peculiar is how the media, like even some of our leaders, like again, our favorite Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, praised Fidel Castro as this sort of hero, when really, he was not that great of a guy. If I seem to remember correctly, there were videos of him from the 1950s where Fidel and Che Guevara were shooting people who disagreed with him and other people within his party, all by firing squad. Not only that, his universal health care, matter of fact, the hospitals during that time period were so bad that people weren't even getting proper health care. Universal health care is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but it has to be done correctly, and Che Guevara clearly didn't do it correctly. But people like to tell me, oh, he did so much for the Africans, for the other Caribbean islands like the Dominican Republic, like Jamaica, and all these other islands. Well, okay, sure, he did well for those other islands, but what about his own people? If anything, he should have put more emphasis on providing for his own people and leaving those other countries so that they can correct themselves. Sure, he may have influenced a lot of revolutionaries, but at the same time, he did so badly for his people that the moment he got sick, they were celebrating. If he was such a revered character, then why were the people celebrating for his potential death? Gee, I wonder why. That's all the time I have for this time around. Join me next time for when I have another interesting news story to share with you. As always, free your mind. This is Mikkel Nelson, and you have just listened to 41.1 The Info Loop.